Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and guests. Please allow me to consider open the meeting of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna for the candidate degree of the candidate of Economic Sciences on the topic Financial Drivers for Economic Growth in the Russian Federation. According to the order of St. Petersburg State University from the 15th of November 2018, number 11174/1, me, Ivanov Viktor Vladimirovich, was appointed the chairman of this dissertational council. And also allow me to introduce my fellow board members. Rizanov Viktor Timofeyevich, Doctor of Economic Sciences, the head of the Department of the Economic Theory of St. Petersburg State University. Lebedeva Marina Evgenievna, Doctor of Economic Sciences, the head of the Department of Banking, Business and Innovation Technologies, International Bank Institute. Yakovleva Elena Anatolievna, Doctor of Economic Sciences, Professor of the Department of Economic Management of Enterprises and Industrial Complexes. Zolotareva, Professor of the Department of Banking Activities, Polishya University, the Republic of Belarus. According to the federal law from the August of 23, 1996, number 127, Federal Law on Science and the State Scientific and Technical Policy, St. Petersburg State University has the right to independently award academic degrees. The corresponding order on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, on the basis of which we conduct our meeting of the Council, was issued on the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1. In accordance with this order, the meeting of the Dissertation Council is considered eligible if at least 2/3 of the approved membership of the Dissertational Council take part in its work, but not less than 4 persons. There are 5 members of the Council, all of them are present. Thus, we have got the quorum. The procedure of today's meeting of the Dissertation Board is the following. The total duration is no more than 2 hours. The chairman's summary report on the main content of the documents submitted by the candidate and their compliance with the established requirements. Answers to possible questions. Then brief report of the candidate for the degree, reflecting the main points of his research, up to 15 minutes. Questions to the candidate, strictly according to his report. No more than 2 minutes for one question. And responses of the candidate. The next point, the speeches of all the members of the Thesis Council by turns, with reviews, with the statement of their positions, with questions and suggestions to the candidate. No more than 10 minutes for the speaker with the review. The speech of the chairman with his review, the answers of the candidate for the degree to the questions and remarks of the members of the Dissertation Council, no more than 15 minutes. Open discussion speeches at the request of those present at the defense of the thesis of persons with a brief presentation of their positions and or with specific questions and proposals to the candidate strictly on the topic of the research. No more than 5 minutes for each applicant. All interested persons are requested to register in the registration sheet and before submitting their speech, fully introduce themselves. Final answers of the applicant for the questions asked, no more than 5 minutes. The speech of the scientific supervisor, no more than 3 minutes. A 5-minute break before an open vote in order to make a conclusion on the issue of awarding or not awarding the academic degree of St. Petersburg State University to the candidate. For the time of the discussion, the defense results by the members of the Thesis Council. The broadcast is turned off. An open individual voting, counting of votes by the chairman of the Dissertational Council with the entering the results in the minutes of the meeting. Decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree of St. Petersburg State University. The final word of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. This is our agenda. Before switching to the realization of the meeting's rules of the procedure, I remind you to switch off your mobile phones. I also inform you that an audio and video recording of our meeting is being conducted, as well as live broadcast on the website of St. Petersburg State University, and simultaneous interpretation of speeches from Russian into English or from English into Russian is also provided. Do you have any questions according to our agenda? Let me start the procedure of the meeting. The dissertation of Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna for a degree of the candidate of Economic Sciences on specialty 080010 Finance, Money, Circulations and Credit on the topic Financial Drivers for Economic Growth in the Russian Federation was accepted for the defense by the order of the Scientific Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, number 11174/1 from 15 of November 2018. And I have already presented to you the members of the Dissertation Council. The candidate submitted the following documents to the Scientific Secretary of St. Petersburg State University: an application form addressed to the Rector of St. Petersburg State University, Professor Nikolai Mikhailovich Kropachev, about the acceptance for consideration and defense for the thesis. A list of publications containing 7 works which outline the main scientific results of the thesis. All 7 articles were published in peer-reviewed scientific publications from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation. The certificate number 4, which was issued to Ms. Yudintseva, certifying that she successfully passed candidate exams: English excellent, the history and philosophy of science excellent, and money, circulation and financial credits excellent. And the conclusion, which was stated on the 28th of September 2018 by the Vice Rector for Research, Mr. Plonov, the Diploma of Higher Education. The thesis is done in Russian and English, both in paper-based version as a manuscript and in the electronic form. The thesis is designed in accordance with the requirements of national state standards. The thesis is printed on a multiplier with the indication of the output data in accordance with national state standards R704. It should be noted that all listed documents comply with paragraph 12 of section 3, presentation and defense on dissertation, procedure for awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg State University, appendix number 1 to the order. Do you have any questions concerning the documents? Now, brief report of the candidate. Please take the floor. Distinguished Chairman, the members of the Dissertation Board, the dissertation on financial drivers of economic growth of the Russian Federation is presented to your attention. The relevance of the dissertation research topic is due to the fact that the Russian economy is in crisis and many issues related to the development and maintenance of the growth trend remain unresolved. Of high priority among them is the question of choosing mechanism for financially stimulating economic growth, which determine the goal and objectives of the thesis. The purpose of the study was to identify effective financial incentive mechanism, financial drivers for the economic growth of the Russian Federation, taking into account the level of development of the national financial system and the characteristic of its functioning. We considered financial drivers as a set of mechanisms for financially stimulating economic growth aimed at maximizing the available opportunities and potential reserves of the financial system to serve the real sector of the economy. The explanation of the financial drivers of economic growth in the Russian Federation, taking into the account the peculiarities of the national financial system and the priorities for the development of the monetary and financial policy, has made the scientific novelty of the study. First, the potential of the Russian financial system in ensuring economic growth is substantiated. As for financial depth, efficiency, availability, and stability, Russian financial systems is shaded by similar systems of developed countries. Regional peculiarities were defined. This situation negatively affects the ability of the financial system to ensure economic growth. Nowadays, there are all types of financial uncertainty, which concerns the environment and managerial decisions. This situation negatively affects the opportunities of financial system and economic growth. Second, recommendations were developed for the development of monetary policy in order to stimulate the economic growth of the Russian Federation. First of all, we believe that it is necessary to change the vector of monetary policy. According to the concept of long-term socio-economic development until 2020, the average annual GDP growth in 2016-2020 should be up to 6.3%, which will allow Russia to reduce the backlog of global leaders and increase competitiveness. However, to achieve these results, it is necessary to set as the main goal of monetary policy the targeting of stable economic growth, but not inflation. Considering that low inflation is not an end itself, it is important to understand that the Russian economy cannot fully realize its potential at the current level of interest rates. We believe that further reduction of key rates is necessary in order to activate the banking channel of the transmission of mechanisms of monetary policy. In our opinion, regional banks should become agents of refinancing for the Bank of Russia, ensuring equal access to sources of financing for practically and small and medium-sized businesses. At the same time, when implementing the transmission mechanism, it is advisable to take into account factors of inflation formation related to regional heterogeneity. In this regard, the socio-economic development of regions should be monitored. A method has been developed for calculating the integral indicator, which gives a comprehensive picture of the socio-economic situation of the analyzed territory. Commenting upon the recommendations on monetary policy, we know that the work revealed the effect of the main channels of the transmission mechanism aimed at reducing inflation. We have revealed the presence of a clear relationship between the key rate and the rates of short-term and long-term loans to non-financial organizations and individuals during 2014-2017. It is also proved that the effectiveness of the banking channel of the transmission mechanism is determined mainly by non-interest factors. First, the volume of lending grew in those segments that enjoyed government support. Under the conditions of macroeconomic uncertainty, the credit activity of most other segments did not react at all to decrease in the key rate. Secondly, the response to the ongoing monetary policy is not found in industries focused on weak domestic demand. Thirdly, the efficiency of the transmission mechanism is negatively affected by weak banking competition in remote regions with low population density, which does not encourage banks to lower loan rates. Fourth, with the officially declared fall in inflation and maintaining interest rates on loans at a fairly high level, there is a relative increase in the cost of loans for the real sector of the economy. Fifth, there is a significant amount of deposits of credit institutions in the Bank of Russia, which in recent years only increases. Obviously, this situation is not conducive to the economic growth. In our opinion, the central bank should support the development of the banking and payment system and not create competition to the real sector of the economy. Third, it is proved that the level of regional banking competition is a factor of uniform financial accessibility. Theoretically, in each region, banking competition should consist of three elements, including competition between large federal banks. However, in Russia, the first two are virtually absent. According to the author, it is important to maintain regional banking competition in all its manifestations, since only in this case can an equal distribution of financial resources be achieved as a necessary prerequisite for economic growth in the Russian Federation. In recent years, Russia has seen a steady decline in the number of independent regional banks and their branches. Using the example of the Siberian Federal District, the following trends have been identified. Over the 5-year period, the expansion indicator increased from 0.21 to 0.31, or by 47.6%. This means that credit institutions in other regions are increasingly using the potential of the credit market of the analyzed region. The development rate of the branch network decreased. There was also a reduction in the number of branches of regional banks, but at a lower rate. Thus, foreign banks still maintain their leading positions. One can observe signs of consolidation of the Russian banking system, primarily in remote regions of Siberia and the Far East. For example, the provision of banking services in the Siberian Federal District is significantly inferior to the national average. This situation limits the potential of financial drivers of economic growth and requires a revision of the priorities of the banking system. Fourth, the negative aspect of the budget policy that affect the effective level of financial accessibility in the Russian Federation are identified. This includes, first, the static structure of budget revenues and expenses. Budget parameters generally support the trends of the past years, which does not contribute to financial stimulation of the economic growth. Secondly, the inefficiency of public spending, which is largely related to the problems of implementing state programs. We know that unclear coherence of federal and regional programs, the absence of rigidly defined sources of funding, the insufficient substantiation of target indicators, and the apparent contradiction between the long-term nature of the programs and medium-term nature of the budgets. In our opinion, the priority of state policy in the development of regions should be a primitive equalization of budgetary security through a subsidized mechanism and the distribution of cheap loans, a system of encouraging regions that showed positive growth trend of GRP is needed. For example, encouragement may be expressed in the fact that the region will be allowed to keep a part of the increase in tax revenues or redirect as discretion a part of the federal budget funds allocated for social purposes to implement investment programs. At present, a tax system has been established that provides for a wide range of tax preferences which are often unsystematic. With our point of view, it is advisable to return the investment tax rebate, which was an incentive for enterprises to use part of the produce to finance investment. We emphasize the lack of effective financial control over the targeted use of budgetary funds. The extreme expression of this problem is corruption, which is one of the key factors of the development of the shadow economy. At the same time, the resources of the shadow economy can be considered as potential source of increasing financial affordability, which emphasizes the significance of the problems identified. An independent author's calculation of this shortfall in budget revenues shows that the loss of personal income tax would be enough to accept deficit-free regional budgets, as well as to pay off almost half of the public debt of the constituent entities of the Russian Federation. Fifth, taking into account the results of the analysis of monetary, non-monetary, external and internal factors that impede stable economic growth, the mechanism and priorities of financial incentives for the investment process in the Russian Federation are identified. The first priority should be to increase the role of the private sector in the investment process. It is especially important to realize this priority in financing innovation. Currently, the state is the main investor in this area. This is associated with such natural problems as hard decision-making algorithm, the selection of projects with a minimum level of risk, often the lack of material motivation and responsibility of investment decision-makers. Overcoming these problems is complicated by the tendency of growth in the share of state ownership in the economy. Overcoming these problems is complicated by the tendency of growth in the share of state ownership in the economy. The next priority is effective, not declarative support for small and medium-sized businesses. In this regard, a substantial transformation of the refinancing system of SMEs through specialized tools of the Bank of Russia is necessary. In particular, we propose the following: to exclude redundant structures from the current system, expand the presence of SME cooperation through the system of multifunctional centers providing state and municipal services, raise awareness of SMEs on the existence and conditions for the concessional lending, expand the line of credit products and reduce the rates on specialized instruments of the Bank of Russia, simplify workflow, engage microfinance organizations in the face of credit cooperatives, reduce the minimum of capital requirements for banks eligible to become partners with the cooperation. The interconnected priority is the development of venture investment funds. In Russia, with the predominant share of state ownership in the economy, the number of corporate venture funds is minimal, which is a deterrent to economic growth. Among the priorities should be the financing of industrial innovations, which should receive institutional support. The share of Russian enterprises investing in the acquisition of new industrial technologies is 11.8%. Moreover, only 9.4% of industrial enterprises carry out the development and introduction of technological innovations. For comparison, in developed countries of Europe, this figure ranges from 50 to 70%. We consider the increase in wages in the real sector as a factor in the introduction of innovations as the most important priority. In our opinion, if enterprises are forced to raise wages, it means that in order to preserve the rate of profit, they will need to introduce innovations helping to reduce costs, increase productivity, produce modern, high-quality, competitive products. Sixth, It is argued that the definition of financial stability as a necessary prerequisite for economic growth should take into account the type of financial system, as well as science of uniformity and efficiency. We propose to consider financial stability as a state of the financial system, in which, given the existing device, it can ensure the effective and even distribution of financial resources through its key channels. The study showed that in Russia, the possibilities of the financial system are far from being fully utilized. The allocation of financial resources is inefficient, which leads to developmental imbalances between individual regions and sectors of the economy. As a result, financial stability decreases and opportunities for economic growth are limited. Summarizing all mentioned above, we note that effective financial stimulation of economic growth is possible only in conditions of effective functioning of the financial system. In Russia, a necessary prerequisite for this is the development of monetary and budget drivers, which is possible with the coordinated implementation of the relevant aspects of monetary and financial policy. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, are there any questions to our candidate? If there are any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Professor Ryzanov Viktor Timofeyevich, as for the last slide about the stability of financial system in Russia, how can you evaluate the preservance of this stability under the conditions of sanctions, present sanctions and new measures connected with the introduction of these sanctions? Thank you very much for your questions. Sanctions is one of the key factors for destabilizing of Russian financial system, but unfortunately Russia exists in these conditions, and it is impossible to overcome completely the consequences of these sanctions. But we should do our best in order to reduce the dependence on the external influence and look for the internal resources for the development of the Russian economy, and our enterprises should develop at the account of our internal refinancing. But it is very difficult to do if we are separated from international technologies. Dear colleagues, any other questions? One more question. It is the continuation of the question concerning the finances and stability. What do you think about our banking system, that it is built on the idea of universal banks? Thank you very much for your questions. The integrity allows commercial banks to cover a wide spectrum of services. When all the banks are similar, the peculiarity is of each bank is being lost. Many regional small banks work in the same conditions with huge banks, and it impedes their effective functioning. The requirements for documents, for the list of services, the more the world of banking services is diverse, the economy will benefit, and it is a positive effect that we have diverse banks. A question about the targeting of growth. Which documents should be altered and at which level? Here it is a global question. Today the central bank is moving in this direction, and there were amendments for the law about the central banks. There is an article, the main of which is not only to provide the sustainability of the ruble, but also the sustainability of economic growth. And today the central bank conducts global work concerning the accumulation of factors, including regional, the factors of pro-inflational, which are taken into account. A central bank is not a separate bank, it is an active participant which aims at economic growth in the country. Dear colleagues, any other questions? Larisa Anatolievna, thank you very much. We continue our procedure. The announcement of the reviews of the members of the Dissertational Council, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Rizanov. Viktor Timofeyevich, please have the floor. Dear candidate, take your seat. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to take part in the work of the Dissertational Council. I deal with economic theory, but I'm interested in finances. For any economy, the role of finances is a key one, and it is very important for Russia, and without doubt the relevance of the research is without doubt. It also has a practical significance. And as for the topic of the research, there are a lot of researchers in the economic literature, special researchers connected with the technology of the financial sector, and also practically all other directions of economic science which research the economic growth and economic problems in the country. They have to address financial problematics, and in this respect the topic is very well explained and described, including general problems of market economy, and also we are interested in the problems of financial sector, financial relationships in our country. And I want to say that in this diverse spectrum of and our candidate submitted very interesting research. I would like to highlight two moments. The research is based on serious analysis of existing literature. It is very important to understand how economic science takes into account these problems. Also, there is a very perfect empirical base. This proves that the works complies with the requirements, and I support the main points of scientific novelty. I'm not going to list all the remarks. On the whole, all this set of these points of scientific novelty allows us to make a conclusion that the dissertation has scientific novelty, and it gives positive evaluation. As for the results of the research, I want to highlight that all these questions should be submitted in various courses concerning finances, money, credits, money, loans, banks, and on the other hand, it is very important that the recommendations help to elaborate the strategy of reforming, especially which concerns regional banks, especially on the example of Siberian economy, the Republic of Khakassia. I would like to focus on my remarks because for our candidates it's very important to show herself in scientific polemics. I want to be as brief as possible. I would like to read out which was formulated in my written report. As for the report concerning the dissertations, they aim to improve the financial system in the Russian Federation. It's very important to take into account the state sustainability of this financial system. It's very important to take into account limitation of speculation financial operations in the currency sphere. Modern financial system is very sufficient and isolated system, and it is necessary to reshift financial system, and it should be aimed at the transformation of savings. And these aspects were poorly investigated. Second, my advice to our candidate to attract and to pay attention to organization of financial services, the development of project financing in the Russian Federation. It is a very important direction in the enhancing roles of finances, their quality. It should be viewed not only as the way to making easy success and the transformation of financial institute within the framework of the policy of socialization of finances. Third, in paragraph 1.1, the author says that in order to achieve economic growth, it is necessary to reduce the state share in the economy. Page 23. Which indicator participated in the measurement of the role of the state in the economic activity? Fourth, the author highlights on page 15 that this market does not make redistributive function. And the fifth, as for the financing of innovation activity in Russia, our author pays a lot of attention to this factor, and it should have been focused on the demand. And to conclude, general remark, this remarks does not reduce the scientific and practical significance of the dissertation. It was accomplished at high professional level. It makes a great contribution into the understanding of financial mechanisms. The dissertation of Yudintseva, Larisa Anatolievna, Financial Drivers for Economic Growth in the Russian Federation, conforms with the main requirements stated by the order, and our candidate deserves the degree of candidate of economic sciences of specialty 111080010, finance, money, circulation and credit. Viktor Timofeyevich, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, according to our agenda, all the responses to the reviews will be read out after all the reviews will be heard. Marina Evgenievna, please take the floor. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in this meeting. And I would like to highlight that the topic, financial drivers for economic growth in the Russian Federation, is actual modern state of the Russian economy, makes actual the systematization and development of the most meaningful financial drivers which influence the economic growth of the country. The problematics is connected with two interchange components of state policy, financial and monetary policies. Despite a wide range of scientific researches in this sphere concerning the main stimulus for financial growth, and taking into account the peculiarities of financial system of Russia, there is no systematic approach to this problem. And as for the drivers for economic growth, it gives the birth to scientific discussions. In the conditions of the crisis and stagnation events concerning the development of the economy, the relevance of these problems is very important. And I think that the dissertation devoted to financial drivers which are necessary for the growth, for economic growth, and it actualizes the aim and goal of the thesis. The analysis allows us to make the conclusions that the scientific provisions are very well explained. The structure of the work is logical. The material complies with the aim and meets the demands of the general scientific principle. The tasks of the research come from the goal, and the content of key categories were very well described. The meaning of financial drivers were proved with the accents to monetary and budget mechanisms. The recommendations on improvement of the instruments were offered. The general scientific special methods of the research characterize our candidate as a mature researcher in this field, subject field, and the work complies with the principles, with this systematic approach, and it allows us to accept the scientific provisions, conclusions, and recommendations. Nevertheless, there are some remarks. First, the author offers to consider financial stability as the condition of financial system in which, taking into account special tools, it is able to provide equal distribution of financial resources through key channels. Redistribution of the resources not always leads to economic growth. It stipulates the necessity to give more detailed explanation of this definition. It is necessary to explain how and which channels are used in economic growth. Is it the growth of the main capital, technical progress? The second remark, with reference to the research of the World Bank, there is a following statement. Citation: we consider that in this context it's very important is the low stability of domestic banking system, the basis of which is several huge banks which state participation, and it gives the birth of to the problem of the modernization of financial sector. Not accidentally, the most part of the enterprises, production companies, have low level of their assets and limited opportunities concerning the attraction of loans. But the author does not give the proofs that the huge banks are the drawback of Russian financial system. In paragraph 1.1, the author refers to Garcia article when financial stability and financial availability go hand in hand. And this dependence is very important for the sectors which are dependent from external sources. We think that it was poorly investigated and should be explained. This is all for my remarks, and I would like to say that my remarks don't humiliate the overall positive evaluation of the work. The dissertation is a separate work. It was accomplished on the actual topic, and it meets the requirements. It has the theoretical and practical significance, and it complies with the passport of scientific specialty 08, 0010, finances, money circulation and credit. Thus, we consider that the dissertation of Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna on the topic financial drivers for the economic growth in the Russian Federation complies with the main requirements stated by the Order 68 on the procedure of the awarding of scientific degrees in St. Petersburg State University, and our candidates deserve the awarding of the scientific degree on the specialty 08, 0010, finances, money circulation and credit. Marina Evgenievna, thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to the Doctor of Economic Sciences, Professor Yakovleva Irina Anatolievna, St. Petersburg State Economic University. Dear candidates, I support the words of my colleagues concerning the actuality, the national level of this problem, the review of the literature. I was very impressed by that. And first of all, I would like to focus on the advantages. I would like to say that the peculiarity of this research is the scientific brevity and a special approach to financial systems. And the author was very brave to declare on pages 10, 11 about the necessity of combination of these trends. Such financial systems should have the following functions: the flow of capital for organizations of production process and implementations of innovations. The payments should be accomplished at the level of financial availability. The provision of integrated financial system in Russia. Then the author indicates about the necessity of information policy and security. And there are a lot of problems connected with psychological problems and situations. It formulates them as the method of early anticipation of the threats in this sphere. Thus, the author formulates that financial system, it is the range of financial markets, institutes and relationships which allow to distribute the financial resources in Russia, which will help economic growth. The author, financial stability, it is closely connected with the complex indicator of economic growth. It is necessary to involve state sector and financial organizations and business household, including financial institutes. As for financial drivers for economic growth, it is necessary to choose the policy of central bank. Also, the definition concerning the channels of banking transmission mechanisms and banking crediting. Then the canals of expectations of the management of exchange rate. And the slide shows us the bright examples of shadow economy. Also, the structure of there is a long list of advantages. The third chapter is a practical one, is of practical value, and I agree with the points of scientific novelty which were very well described in the dissertation, and I want to focus on two groups of remarks. All my remarks are available on the website of St. Petersburg State University. The first group is connected with the concept of financial stability. Some terminological systems should be explained. Financial stability, the definition of financial stability does not uncover the notion for economic structures. For example, for industrial enterprises, can this term be applied? This second one, it is necessary to define financial drivers, taking into account the subjects of financial system, and the financial system is multi-layered and it has got poor structure. The second group of remarks, it is connected with the definition. The author used a mixed approach for financial system. I have a question for Khakassia Republic. The function of the management of financial drivers. Was this question elaborated? Will it help in the near future to understand the sources of key financial stability in the Russian Federation? But I want to repeat that my remarks does not humiliate the peculiarity of the dissertation. The dissertation of Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna on the topic financial drivers for economic growth in the Russian Federation conforms with the requirements stated by the order from the 1st of September 2018 on the candidate, Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna, deserve the degree of the candidate of economic sciences on specialty 080010, finances, money, circulation and credit. Point 1 was not violated, point 11 was not violated by the candidate. And now the floor is given to the Doctor of Economic Sciences, Professor Zolodareva Olga Alexandrovna. Thank you very much. I would like to thank St. Petersburg State University for the opportunity to participate in the meeting of this dissertational board. I came from Belarus, from Polisia State University. I want to highlight the peculiarities and drawbacks of the thesis. Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna submitted modern, very actual research which has got theoretical and practical value. The author investigated the financial drivers for economic growth in the Russian Federation, and a very important problem was solved to create appropriate priorities concerning economic growth. The main provisions for the novelty of the dissertation, it is the role of financial and monetary policy was proved. Financial stability, key sources of financial uncertainty in the Russian Federation were shown. A special methodics was elaborated, and on the example of Federal Siberian District, the availability of financial services were explained. New mechanisms of transformation on financial resources were offered into investments aimed at the attractions of private investment into private economy. I agree with these provisions of the scientific novelty. Also, the characteristics for financial system in Russia, according to 4 criteria: availability of financial resources, financial depth, and so on, as well as the candidate's vision of financial theory were presented. The efficiency of various channels of monetary transmissions were analyzed, and as an example of the influence of monetary policy, the economy of Siberian Federal District, we took the Republic of Khakassia. Using statistical data, the author indicates the examples of poor financing in remote regions. On the basis of this analysis, the author explains the necessity of informational targeting to the targeting of economic growth. A specific measure on the transformation of the system of refinancing of Russian bank for the development of medium and small business. On the example of Siberian Federal District, the author offers to preserve regional banks The thesis proves that regional banks are better in the regional specifics than huge banks, and also budget mechanisms were investigated in the works, and there was a conclusion that they are incomplete. The redistribution of financial resources is not effective, and it leads to disproportion of the development between the industries, between the sectors in the regions. But it is the dignity of the research. And a few words about the drawbacks of the research. First of all, the thesis is called the influence of financial drivers on economic growth. It is measured by current indicators. One of them is gross domestic product, but it does not always characterizes the economic situation in the country. Other countries, they often use Yudintseva indexes. Gross domestic products ignores the structure of the economy, and the cost of the products which are produced on the territory of the country, regardless of their ethnicity. Taking into account the drawbacks of these current indicators, I would like to offer economic development rather than economic growth. The author left the limits of her research. She studies the influence the financial drivers on the level of life, human capital of the country. The next remark, the author offers to central bank to target non-economic growth, and the author understand the close connections between the real sectors, but it is not very well argumentated. There are some risks. The targeting of economic growth as the main aim of monetary policy of central bank can lead to the mixture of the functions and decrease the economic independence of the last one. And the economic growth will be considered as a part of general economic development of the country as the separate indicator. The transition to stimulating credit policy to develop small and medium businesses, and the author does not take into account the conditions of the conducting of this policy. How can we combine the necessary how can we combine this stimulating policy and price stability? The fourth remark, the questions concerning the development of the stock markets in the Russian Federation were not researched in the dissertation. These remarks are only recommendations. The thesis is a separate, completed, qualified research. It contains new scientific results. The provisions and conclusions are very well explained. The works which were published, they uncover the main content of this thesis. I think that the thesis complies with the specialty 08/0010 finances, money, circulation and credit. The thesis complies with the requirements and the candidate Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna deserves the degree of the candidate of economic sciences on the specialty 080010 finances, money circulation and credit. Point 11 of this order was not violated by the candidate. Thank you very much, Olga Alexandrovna. Dear colleagues, let me read out my own review. The thesis of Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna shows the results which are aimed at the scientific problem of high social and economic significance. It is aimed at the stimulating of economic growth in all regions of the Russian Federation. The relevance of this research is stipulated by high significance of cash and long-term economic development of the national economy. As a theoretical basis for the research, our candidate used fundamental works of Russian and foreign researchers, the systemization of huge block of federal and regional statutory acts, regulatory acts, and it allowed our author to submit to show conclusions and provisions. The structure of the dissertation is logical, and it allowed our author to uncover the potential of the development of financial drivers of the economic growth in the Russian Federation through the modernization of monetary instruments, taking into account real and financial sectors of national economy. The thesis generalizes scientific methods of scientific research. They correlate with methods of statistic analysis. The use of these methods with the extraction of the statistical data allowed to uncover the drawbacks of monetary policy in the Russian Federation and explain these recommendations in order to restore the economic growth in the country. The novelty of these scientific provisions and recommendations. The dissertation is logical. The thesis, it is diverse scientific work. It is logical, and it allowed our candidate to obtain new scientific results. Among them, there are theoretical explanation of financial drivers of the economic growth through harmonious application of the instruments of crediting policy and financial availability of all subjects of the national economy. And the main results of this study are the explanation of the significance of regional factors of transmissional mechanisms of inflation forming. The thesis shows that in the conditions of differentiation, classical transmissional mechanism of monetary policy, which is used by the Russian banks, influences differently in the regionals, and it enhances the differentiation in the level of the salaries of the population. The second, the necessity of the preservation of banking system not only by huge banks but also small and middle banks, page 75-76. The priority of the tasks to provide compliance of monetary and tax policies conducted by the Russian Bank, page 48, 65, 78, 90. Then the explanation of the mechanism of securitization, page 124, 125. The explanation of the character between the level of salaries and the level of the activities of the subjects. And when the envelope pay negatively affect the financial situation and economic situation in the regions, and the influence of the monetary instruments in the social and economic development in the regions. Page 110, 116. The theoretical significance of this study is in the development of the methodology of the financial availability in the subjects of the Russian Federation and the differentiation of the Russian regions. As for the applied objects, the method of calculation of integral figures on the basis of statistical data we can compare the results of the thesis can be used in educational process. Of course, there are some arguable questions in the thesis. The first is for the shadow economy. The author connects it with the improvement of the investment climate, the creation of jobs, and so on. And it allowed, according to candidates' opinion, pay official salaries. Envelope payments are very successful, nevertheless. Among the reasons of the inclinations of the citizens to save the money, it indicates at the low financial literacy among our population. Most part of the population trusts the government of the Russian Federation, and it is rated at the governmental approach in terms of the distribution of the cash. And this our citizens preserves either dollars or rubles, but in cash. And thanks to financial sector, more and more enterprises, including innovational vast and high-risk enterprises, will receive the access to refinancing. But I think that this idea is too optimistic, because refinancing and access to financing, they are not connected directly. And finally, non-correct formulations. Page 23, the author writes about the degradation of accumulated capital. But this critics does not humiliate the positive impressions from the work of our candidate. It is a professional and logical research. A range of the results demonstrates the use of original scientific and critical approach, and it is very important in terms of theory and practice. And the topic of the dissertation conforms with the requirements of the specialty 080010, finances, money, circulation and credit. point 11.9 crediting regulation, point 11.10 the strategy and tactics of using of money management, and so on. The thesis of Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna on the topic financial drivers for economic growth in the Russian Federation conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 1st of September 2016 number 6821/1, and the candidate Yudintseva Larisa Anatolievna deserves the scientific degree of the candidate of economic sciences on specialty 080010 finance, money circulation and credit. Point 11 of this order was not violated by the candidates. Thank you very much. All the members of the dissertational council voiced their reviews. And dear candidate, your general comment. Dear members of the dissertational board, thank you very much for your constructive remarks. As for the remark of Viktor Timofeyevich, as for the first remark, I agree that such critics of the modern model of bank development was beyond the frames of our research. We considered the priority of predominance of financial development. Along with that, this theory proves that these speculative factors are negatively effective in terms of redistribution of financial resources. This factor is attributed to external factor. As for the second question, Viktor Timofeyevich, thank you very much for your valuable recommendations, and I agree that potential concerning Russian financing is very relevant nowadays. Point 3.1. Existing conditions of crediting with the use of these instruments, they are very strict and they are not adapted to the request of the real economic sector, and their realization is connected with the overcoming of institutional barriers. And the evaluation of the state share in the economy is based on three elements. According to the standards, state-owned companies, these are companies with 10% of state participation. And on the whole, the state share in the economy has increased. The experts found out the negative connection between the indexes of gross domestic product and state ownership. We consider necessary to decrease the state participation in the economy. As for the methodology of international indexes, Russian stock market, it is characterized by the high concentration and secondly by the high level of state participation. This indicator was account for 4%, and state-owned companies receives subsidies, grants, donations from the state. Thus, Russian stock market does not have redistributory function. As for question number 5, I would like to highlight that the increased demand for innovations is closely connected with the availability of external financing of the enterprise. Enterprises must be sure that the innovative produce will be in high demand in terms of quality and price. And low salary is a problem nowadays. As for Marina Evgenievna's remarks, I agree with her that financial stability is necessary but not the only condition for economic growth. The quality and the number of workforce is of high priority. The second question. I would like to say that the research showed the concentration of bank capital leads to the decrease of bank competition due to the removal of small banks from market arena.
Так как будут затронуты интересы широкого круга агентов.
In order to restore this stability, it will require considerable financial resources. For example, Miroshnichenko, Kovaleva, Taleva's researchers prove this fact. As for the third question, the connection between financial availability and economic growth, a sustainable financial system leads to financial stability. A high priority in terms of economic development, it is an availability of the sources of economic financing. Nowadays, there are no objective prerequisites in Russia. For example, low inflation expectations, effects of technological transfers, the accumulation of domestic savings, they could help sustainable economic growth, for example. As for the remarks of Yakovleva Yelena Anatolievna, the first question, as for financial stability, there were relationships between organizations, financial markets, and institutes. These financial structures are applied to markets, institutions, and financial organizations. They are consumers of financial services. Financial sector influences the financial stability. As for the question concerning the financial depth and economic growth and quality of life, the results of empirical researches should be noted, and it is represented as for the second question, we are talking about the explanation of financial system. It is based on the synthesis of institutional understanding. the model of financial development help us to uncover the drivers for the economic development. At the same time, the aim of the thesis was to find out the drivers for economic growth, taking into account the instability of economic system. As for the remarks of Olga Alexandrovna, the first question, the rate of gross domestic products growth it is uncertain, and it should be aided with the help of hedonistic indexes. Russia is a developing country. Within the frames of the research, the gross domestic product growth was the orienting point for this economic growth. Then the main aim of monetary policy of the Russian bank is not only to provide the sustainability of the ruble, but also to create balanced and sustainable economic growth. And the balanced character of economic growth is underlined and highlighted. In our opinion, the targeting of inflation leads to the negative changes in the economy. As for the third question, I would like to highlight that stimulating monetary policy is possible to provide without additional attraction of money. The fourth question, stock market can be attributed to financial drivers of economic growth, but in financial system of non-market conditions, our research showed that financial system combines the features of financial systems of bank and budget types. Thus, stock market is not the factor of economic growth requiring the prioritized attention. As for the remarks of Viktor Vladimirovich, the first question, I think that the economy should, the legalization of shadow economy should be helped by reorganizational and restrictional policy, but traditional methods of control which are applied in this sphere, they leave much to be desired, and thus we focused on stimulating methods. As for the second question, there is a problem of low financial literacy, and it concerns the crediting sphere, because people opt to save money in cash. The third question, positive effect of financial depth on the level of financial availability are based on the works of famous researchers. The role of restricting factors can reduce positive effects. That's why we focused on the factors of equal and efficient financial availability. As for question number 4, that it is better to use the term main funds rather than main capital. That's all for now. I have answered all your remarks. Larisa Anatolievna, thank you very much. Please be seated. And I have a question for those who are present in the hall. There are no volunteers, and let me turn to the next stage. I would like to give the floor to the scientific supervisor, Lvova Nadezhda Alexeyevna. First of all, I would like to thank all the members of the Dissertational Council for their remarks, for their attention. On my behalf, I would like to highlight that the thesis of Larisa Anatolievna is a completed scientific work. It complies with the passport of the specialty finances, money, circulation and credit. The work has scientific novelty, integrity. The contribution of the author is reflected in the tasks and goals of this thesis, in the conclusions of this thesis. To my mind, the thesis has a theoretical meaning, theoretical significance. At the same time, applied significance of the topic is reflected in the author's recommendations. During the process of the preparation of the thesis, Larisa Anatolievna showed herself as a mature researcher. It is connected with the work with scientific literature, participation in scientific communication, conferences. I want to highlight that Larisa Anatolievna met the requirements concerning the publications and approbations of the main provisions of the dissertations. And I agree that Larisa Anatolievna deserves the awarding of the degree of the candidate of the economic sciences 080010, finances, money, circulation and credit. Nadezhda Alexeyevna, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, the next stage is the discussion by members of the Council of the issues of awarding a scientific degree. We are going to have a 5-minute break. I ask you to turn off the sound during the broadcast of the meeting. Guests and colleagues who are not the members of the Dissertational Council, I ask you to leave the hall. I will invite you when our consultation meeting is over.
Продолжается. Прошу включить звуковое сопровождение.
The meeting continues. I asked you to switch on the sound of the meeting's broadcast to make sure that it is working. I raised the question of awarding an academic degree to an open roll call. I remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council on the issue of the awarding the degree is considered positive if more than half of it voted for, but not less than 3 members of the Dissertational Council who participated in the meeting in accordance with paragraph 23 of the procedure for awarding the academic degrees in St. Petersburg State University, Appendix number 1 to the order. Mr. Timofeev, I'm for. Elena Anatolievna, I'm for. Thank you. Olga Alexandrovna, I'm for. Thank you. I'm for. Counting votes and announcement of the results of the votes. This out of 5 members of the council participating in the meeting of the Dissertation Council of 5 members considered for. There are no against, there are no abstained from vote. Decision on awarding the academic degree of the candidate of economic sciences, finances, money, circulation and credit is accepted. Our congratulations to you. The final words of the candidate. It should be brief. I would like to express my deep gratitude to the members of the Dissertation Board for the time you have spent on my research, for your critics, which helps find the essence. I also want to express my gratitude to Viktor Vladimirovich for methodological and organizational support. Of course, I also expressed my gratitude to Lvova Nadezhda Alexeyevna for her professionalism, for her patience, for her lessons given to me, her attention to details, and her support during the period of our communication. And also I would like to say thank you to all the professors of St. Petersburg State University. The meeting is declared closed. Thank you all for participation. Thank you. Please switch off the